To call plays or not to call plays? Will giving up play calling actually work for Gus this time?
You are Locked On UCF, your daily podcast on the UCF Knights, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome on in to Locked On UCF, your daily UCF podcast. I'm your host, Mike G, and thank you so much for making Locked On UCF your first listen of every day. Joining me for the first time over on this side is my good friend, Jake Crane, host of Crane & Co. You can find him on Twitter. Check the @ down there, guys. Jake, let's jump right into play calling. Gus has decided to give up play calling. You've covered this coach for a long time. How is it he always finds himself here when it comes to play calling?
Well, I tell you what, for the UCF fans out there, you couldn't ask two better guys to talk about Gus Malzahn switching up to play calling duty than these two right here. But no, I appreciate you having me, Mike. You know, it's at this point, because we've seen this happen, and when he's been a head coach, obviously when you're the offensive coordinator, you're going to be calling the plays. But as a head coach, if you've ever seen the movie Zoolander, where he has three different looks, but they're always the same look, because he can't turn left. It just feels like this with Gus Malzahn. Every place he goes to be a head coach, it's like it's the same move, and we've seen it over and over again. And I mean, it has to, Mike, for this to happen as a head coach that has called plays and then given up play calling duty and then called plays again. You know, I guess it has to hit a certain wall where you're playing so poorly or it's going so badly that you just have to make a change to make a change. So it's not like the system is getting overhauled. And I think sometimes there's a common misconception that, with a new guy calling plays, he's just going to bring in a bunch of totally different plays that we've never run before.
Right.
That's really not how that works. It's almost impossible to do that in real time. During the regular season, you obviously implement new things, but you can't have a huge pole shift. You can't go from like being air raid to triple option because you brought in another guy to call plays, and the guy that's calling plays has to use your same terminology, and it has to be somewhat close or almost exactly the same to what you've been running.
So is it more about flow of play calling?
It's tendency.
Yeah.
It's tendency, and it's a fresh look, because at this point in the year, and really when you get into, I mean, heck, when I was coaching in South Alabama, by the time we got into week 5 and week 6, you have enough information where when the defensive guys on the other team, if you're an offensive guy that you're playing, break down your film, they get percentages of what you do at a formation, ball location on the field is on the left hash, left middle, whatever, what you do down and distance wise, and what you do out of certain personnels, right? 10 personnel, 11 personnel, 12 personnel. And they have a tendency, because as a play caller, it's just like a pitcher. You may mix it up every now and then, but you have things you go back to because you're a human being that you trust the most that you've been watching.
Right.
But with a new play caller, the tendencies are different. You're calling different plays or the same plays maybe in different situations. Or philosophically, you may be a little bit more aggressive or less aggressive than the last guy. So maybe you're not taking advantage of the deep third as much or trying to. You're more of a quick passing game to intermediate passing game type guy. So it's not as much about new plays. It's about a fresh look, a tendency breaker, and putting the defense in a disadvantageous situation because all the numbers they just crunched mean nothing when somebody else is calling the plays.
It's funny watching this process go down. The game has changed. The game has changed a lot since Gus Malzahn got his first P5 job. And you see coaches go through this evolution. It seems to be the offensive head coaches that struggle with this the most. The defensive head coaches, they hire offensive coordinators. It either works or it doesn't. If it doesn't, you fire the guy, you get another guy. Here, there's a tug of war between wanting to do it their way versus finding somebody who maybe sees your same vision. Is it just that trust isn't there with the play caller, or can he let go of this truly?
Well, and I want to preface by saying play calling defensively matters, but defense is reactionary. So, for example, I sit here and they're, on the sideline about to run out for their first play. We're on the sideline about to run out for the first play. I call, hey, give me over, yellow, cut. All right, which means I want an over front. We're going to, we color coded our coverages. So give me cover 4, and we're going to tag cut into the boundary, which is kind of a trap coverage into the boundary. You really don't do it to the field a lot because it's tougher. Well, if you come out, because you have somebody in your ear saying, hey, it's 11 personnel, it's 11 personnel. So you're screaming 11, 11, 11 because you have to react to what they line up in and what personnel they have. So they may be in 11 personnel and you're like, all right, give me over yellow cut, but they come out and line up in empty. Well, now your guy has to check to whatever your empty check is. So on offense, you really dictate how the defense aligns a lot. Now, that's not talking about pressures and any of that stuff where you're trying to set the tone defensively. But as far as the way that it works, you're reacting as a play caller because you may have to check to something else, or they may give you that fake snap, look to the sideline, it's a check with me. Hey, we showed our pressure. Let's get out of it, or let's show it and bluff. And there's an old saying that defenses always catch up, regardless of what evolutionary system. And offenses, they always find a way, and the rules are always slanted to help the offense. That's just part of it. But defensive guys always catch up. It's really hard to, evolve in the sport once. And then when they catch up, you got to evolve
again. Yeah.
And so it's hard. Like you look at Gus Malzahn at Auburn, for example. How did Gus Malzahn get famous? Hurry up, no huddle. Hurry up, no huddle, and Wildcat. Well, defenses eventually figured out how to do it, and Gus Malzahn got slower and slower and slower when he was at Auburn. Defenses were evolving to his evolution, and he was devolving because the defense was evolving, if that makes sense. So it's hard to keep reinventing yourself. I think one of the best ways I've ever put it was it's kind of like the stock market. You may have a formula that works from 1995 to 2000 in the stock market, but we're in 2015. That formula doesn't work anymore. So now you've got to reinvent a new formula to be able to make money at the rate you were making money before. And that's not an easy thing to do. So to me, not that it's easier to be a defensive play caller, because anytime, like as a secondary coach, you're going backwards, like at corner, it makes it tougher. And again, the rules are slanted to help the offense because points sell tickets and get more views. It's a very reactionary thing as a defensive play caller. And again, if you're a defensive coach, and your offensive coordinator isn't working out, well, that's fine. I have a system in my mind I want you to kind of run because I know what hurts defenses. But if that doesn't work, I'll just fire you and bring in a guy that runs a different system. So maybe bring in a guy that made that evolutionary step, right, that now everybody's, running. Which it's funny, Mike, everybody thinks the RPO is some amazing new invention, like it's like a time machine or something that we've never, or like a car that runs on water, which they probably have, but that's a story for another day. But it's really the triple option, but instead of the pitch man, you have a pass tag to it. It's still that zone read action, which in triple option, you're stopping the dive, right? If you don't want to give the dive, he keeps it, and then it turns into a speed option to the outside. Well, now you just took the speed option element out of it, and you got a slant, to the nickel. So the RPO was an evolution, but it wasn't like some reinvented brand new idea or brand new offense that you came up with. So it's kind of fascinating to keep track of.
Yeah, look, play calling is an art, and the better play callers in the game that have been doing it, I would say 6-7+ years and have seen somewhat of a shift in college football. Steve Sarkisian comes to mind. Obviously, Lane Kiffin is one of the better play callers in the game today. But it is an art, and that evolution, I think, is what makes or breaks a lot of offensive head coaches.
Well, and Mike, I tell you what, and now that I'm out of the coaching game, I can say this, but it used to scare me to tell guys this. And what great play callers offensively, that you can do it in multiple ways, but they typically have similar traits. And what do I mean by that? Number one, it's a feel thing. It is a 100% feel thing as a play caller. But the second thing is what Steve Sarkisian and Lane Kiffin and them have done really well is, and I know I don't think I can cuss on here, but they basically go against all the normal rules of offense because as a defense, since it's reactionary, I'm getting taught that if you line up tight, you're going wide. If one guy's going this way, another guy's coming back. Well, what Steve Sarkisian does is they go against the normal offensive rules. They'll line up tight and stay tight down the field. So they know where I'm going to line up at safety based on the way they come out. They just do the opposite of what offensive have been doing for a long time. So it's different to a defensive player because you're looking at that saying, that doesn't make sense. Why would you do that? Why? That's not sound. But in fact, it works because it's new. And then the thing they do the best is they're not afraid to call a play that gets 2 yards in the first quarter to set you up for a touchdown in the third quarter. People always ask, why? How does Lane Kiffin know? How can he throw his clipboard up before the receivers even gotten out of his break? Well, because he called a play a quarter and a half ago, and they saw that safety bite on it, and he knows when they call it again and they run the counter off of it, it's going to be a touchdown. So those are kind of the traits that great play callers have.
Well, play calling has a lot to do with who is your trigger man back there at QB.
Yeah, that's the main thing. Like, I've seen a lot of dumb schematic guys look genius because they had better players. I've seen a lot of geniuses look really stupid because at the end of the day, football is a game that's won by players while coaches watch and talk about it.
For sure. Well, Malzahn has another QB controversy on his hands. I won't call it a controversy, but he played his fourth string QB. Obviously, KJ Jefferson was the high-profile transfer that came in. It didn't work out. They went to Jacurri Brown after trying EJ Colson, and then Brown got benched last week versus BYU, and Dylan Risk came in. So, and before we move on, quick word from our sponsors, and we're going to talk a little bit about QB. Today's show is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Jake, the line on this one is -6 in UCF's favor. You're probably the most prolific parlay guy I know. What do you got here? Are you taking UCF in the points?
Well, listen, I'm going to be 100. I always, try and keep it as honest as possible. I'm not betting this UCF Arizona game to save my life, dude, because both teams are in weird spots. But you know what? I don't know if you have the over-under, the total on the over-under there.
54.5.
54.5. I would probably this feels like a game that the under at 54.5 with these quarterback problems, not only at UCF, but it seems like some Arizona guys have checked out as well. I mean, you look at McMillan at wide receiver, who's going to be one of the first guys taken. They're out of it. How much you going to get out of him? Fafita, I'm not going to say anything, Mike, but I got a pretty good idea where Fafita may end up. I'm not going to say it on here,
okay, all right.
but it's not going to be Arizona. But when I look at just across the board, I tell you what, man, there's a couple bets out there that I've been betting Army every week, and I know 24.5 is a lot against Air Force, and it may change on FanDuel as we get closer. But I'm riding with Army. But if I had to take one bet in this game, take the under 54.5, and then I would buy Arizona up to 7.5 on the alt line and probably parlay those together. Ooh. This smells like. Like a, I would say 23-17 game. That's what it smells like to me.
And the prediction. Look, prolific betting advice from our guy, Jake Crane, guys. So whether you agree with Jake or not, head on over to FanDuel.com and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Jake, the quarterback shuffle, it feels like in today's college football, if you don't have at least two quarterbacks that can get the job done, you're playing with fire. Injuries happen. Obviously, poor play happens. And in this case, Gus found himself in a very precarious situation where he brought in a starting quarterback from an SEC school that had a fair amount of success and found out that the floor was much lower for that quarterback than maybe he anticipated. And he moved on. So you've got Jacurri Brown, who transferred from Miami. You've got EJ Colson, the freshman, who still looks like a freshman. And it looks like they're leaning towards trying to preserve his red shirt. Where do you go here if you're Malzahn? Do you really consider starting your fourth-string quarterback this season? How do you look at the rest of this season, from 3 and 5?
Well, and this is obvious, but it's one thing to go from your starter to your backup, whether that's because of poor performance or injury. But it's another thing when you start going to the third string guy, and then it's a totally different thing when you go to the scout team quarterback.
Are you giving up by going to your fourth string guy?
Like, to me, and again, I'm not at practice, but I know UCF is a fantastic place to play football, and you can recruit really well there. But I don't think the fourth string quarterback is the guy that's going to come in and bring you to glory. To me, at this point, I think you got a couple options. One is, you go back to the second string, if you want to preserve the third string guy's red shirt, that's on you. It's his future, whatever. But if you go back to the second string, or even start going back to the Malzahn special, man, maybe a little bit of wildcat. Maybe we do some things a little bit more alternative, put in some more triple option principles or something. It's just any time, and I know you want to show the people you realize there's a problem and you're trying to fix it, right? Just like the play calling thing. It's kind of similar in there. But to me, once you start getting down to that part of the barrel in the fourth string quarterback, you really look desperate and that you're grasping at straws. And there's probably a 90% chance that what you see on the field is one of the reasons why that guy was the fourth string quarterback. So It's one thing to show you're trying to make improvement because you recognize the problem, but it's another thing to, just absolutely hope for a miracle and like consistent miracles with him taking snaps out there. So to me, I would probably just go back to Jacurri, as bad as it looked. If that ship has completely sailed, you got to go back to Jacurri and, maybe you run it more. Maybe you do more wildcat. Nobody knows that better than Gus Malzahn.
I want to talk about Dylan Risk, though. So he got in at the end of the BYU game and led a touchdown drive. Now, a lot of fans were in the mentions this week saying, well, he did it against the second string defense. I mean, you get your shot when you get your shot, Jake. So if you go out there and you crap the bed, they're going to say, oh, well, that's why that guy was fourth string. He didn't do that. As a matter of fact, he did enough that it's been a conversation this week with Tim Harris taking over play calling about whether he should get a shot or not. Now, what's going on at UCF right now is Jacurri Brown is an amazing athlete. As a matter of fact, I think against Iowa State, he had 13 rushes for 154 yards. He combined with RJ Harvey to just go absolutely bonkers on the ground. I think they put up 350 yards combined between the two of them. But Dylan Risk is not a statue, but he threw some nice balls there. Like, what can you take away from a guy who gets in the fourth quarter, and does what he's supposed to do? I mean, look, they put him out there. He played ball. He led scoring drives.
Well, it's tough. You're almost forced into playing him because if you put a guy in there and say, here's your shot, and he comes through, you lose all credibility in the locker room to everybody else if you don't put him back out there. So now it's kind of the reverse of what we were saying with Peyton Thorne at Auburn, Mike, not to, switch over to Auburn, but it's like, if this guy can make all these mistakes and you won't pull him, then how could you ever look at the left guard who's screwing up blocking and say, you're not playing good enough, we got to put somebody else in there? It's like, well, the quarterback can play bad and you don't change him. It's the reverse here. Well, we were screwing up there. You made a change regardless of circumstance. And it may be true that, BYU had a bunch of 15-year-olds out there, whatever, which, typically at BYU, they're closer to 35 than 15, but that's a story for another day. He went out there, did what he's supposed to do. We should give him another chance to do what he's supposed to do. How could you ever look at another guy, or how can guys have confidence when you look at him and say, all right, it's your shot, go take advantage of it? In the back of their mind, where they're like, well, you didn't do that for him, so why would you do that for me? But if you're sitting there putting up those numbers on the ground with Jacurri Brown, I don't know how you don't go back to that and say, this is just who we're going to have to be. Like, we're going to have to adjust the passing game to make this thing easier, even if he isn't a great thrower. And there's some teams out there where they don't have great throwers at quarterback, but the running element opens up everything else there. So will the fourth string kid get a shot? I think he should early. You see how that goes. If it starts going downhill, I think you put Jacurri back out there and, hey, let's get back to this read option. Let's mess with their eyes a little bit and see if we can't hit them over the top and then dink and dunk them and pitch a little bit backwards.
Jake, you and I have had so many quarterback conversations over the years.
Yeah.
For our listeners, for UCF fans, break this down. How much at this point in the season does what you see in practice matter? You hear coaches say, oh, well, he had a great week of practice. Well, at some point that has to translate to the field. And how great can a guy practice before you just say, you know what, we're going to give this other guy a shot. And yes, you can't bomb it in practice, but having a great practice doesn't always translate to results on the field on Saturday.
Well, we see that in all walks of life. I mean, there's some people that are brilliant in law school, but you put them in a courtroom and they can't win a case. I mean, sometimes when the lights come on and it's at its biggest moment, some guys play better than they practice. Other guys practice better than they play. Other guys play as well as they practice. I mean, you get all types, right? We see this, but when the pressure's at its highest, that's when you find out who can really do it and who can't. When the bullets are really flying, who can do it and who can't. So you don't get fired because of how great your practices are. Like, nobody's ever been like, well, I tell you what, we're 6-1, but that Tuesday practice, the AD was there and inside drill is not good, so we're going to fire the coach. Like, nobody gets hired because of practice. You don't have any ADs that are like, we were going to go with guy A, but guy B, boy, that Wednesday practice I saw, they may be 0-7, but that was a hell of a practice. So you are judged as a coach. You are judged as a player. And you're really judged as a fan on who you root for about how the game goes, the actual game. So to me, it's pretty easy to see this far along. Am I getting fooled in practice because this guy is one thing in a controlled environment, but then when he gets in a non-controlled environment, he's a totally different person. That can go a good way. That can go a bad way. Practice is unbelievably important. I'm a firm believer in you practice like you play. Preparation for most people is the key, but there are some guys, right? There are some that when those lights come on, they're just different in a good way and in a bad way. It's your job as a coach to figure out who those guys are and put that right mix together out on Saturdays.
Look, Jake, I want to close continuing this conversation, but not after one more word from our sponsors. Today's show is brought to you by our friends at Hims. Jake, these days, the kids, when you're the man, they say he's him, right? And one place you want to be him is in the bedroom.
Oh, for sure. It's been my life goal, Mike.
Hims has you covered. Sometimes intimate moments happen spontaneously, and we always want to be ready. We always want to be him on the spot. Hims provides access to treatments that can help you stay hard and last longer, giving you that boost of confidence so you can be ready when the mood strikes. Start your free online trial at hims.com/lockedon. That's hims.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment.
Nice. Did not expect that. I'm going to be honest. Did not expect that one.
I love that.
Whole new meaning to triple option.
Oh my God. I love that ad read. It's my favorite. Again, closing out here with quarterback. Dylan Ritz did what he had to do versus BYU at the end of the game. Jacurri Brown he was throwing interceptions when they pulled him. He threw the last.
You can't turn the ball over.
Yeah, it was just a terrible overthrow down the middle. He floated it. It was the easiest interception any DB is ever going to get. I want to go back to the question I asked earlier about whether starting. Can you seriously tell the fan base, because a lot of people are calling for Gus's head right now? Can you tell the fan base that we're building for the future by starting Dylan Ritz? What's the risk?
Yeah, well, it's a lot of it is how long you've been there, right? Like, how much equity have you built up with the fan base? And I've said this about Kalen DeBoer at Alabama. Like, what he did at Washington, no Alabama fans care about that time they beat Oregon. They're just like, how do we have 2 losses before November since the first time in 2007? You have no equity built up. Not that Gus hasn't done anything. Like, Gus has had some good times there, so he has some equity built up. But you don't have like a life insurance policy, back then that you can look back on and say, hey, every time we've screwed up, I've fixed it, right? So this is why you should trust me and not freak out. I don't think he has that type of leash, even though Gus Malzahn is a guy that's unbelievably well respected in college football and the coaching community, has had a ton of success, has been a great innovator. UCF fans don't care about what he did with Darren McFadden. Like, that means nothing to them. They want you to win at UCF. So to me, just like pretty much everybody else, unless you're one of these guys that has been in a place for a long time, like Dabo at Clemson. I mean, I can go down the list of guys that have been at places for a long time and have built up that cachet and built up that equity. It's not what have you done for me? What did you do for me 2 years ago? It's not what are you doing for me in the future? It's, hey man, we're 3-5. Like, that isn't good enough around here, and you haven't convinced us for long enough that you can not only fix this, but right the ship in the long term. So, look, the pressure to win at UCF is really high, and that's a compliment to them. It's one of the things that happens when you go to the Big 12. Yeah. Gus Malzahn knows that. Their whole coaching staff knows that. So no, I don't blame the fans. And as far as the way this year ends, I think it is going to dictate whether Gus Malzahn's there or not. I mean, we have UCF fans that call in the Crane Company that want him fired right now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a precarious situation, I think, to find yourself in here. If you're Gus, you got to find a way to finish this season on some kind of positive note. In the situation that they're at with QB right now, I think that's easier said than done. But we're going to end this show on a positive note by thanking Jake Crane from Crane & Co. Joining us today. Jake, before we get out of here, tell people where they can find you.
Yeah, I know it's a tough time for UCF fans right now, but you still love college football and you still want to talk about it. It's Crane & Company, CRAIN & Company. We're on YouTube, Roku, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, pretty much everywhere. Just Google it. I'll be in the one in the middle that's the best looking. So between the three of us, come hang out live 2 to 3:30 p.m. Central. We have live calls, live chat. If you can't catch it live, it stays on demand. But Mike, it's great to join you, man.
Thanks, Jake. I think Blaine would maybe dispute that last segment about who's best looking. But
man, look at that mustache. It's like he's about to sell me a reverse mortgage.
Guys, thanks for making Locked On UCF your first listen today. For your second listen, go check out our friends over at Locked On Big 12. Our guy Drake Toll leads the conversation in conference realignment news and holds no punches when it comes to covering every team in the Big 12. Find Locked On Big 12 on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Guys, we'll see you guys tomorrow with more Locked On UCF.